Hello detectives, we're here, it's the final month, and I'm sure you're all waiting for the big reveal of the quilt. Well, all I have to show you right now is a picture of it because I'm going to be assembling it on these videos so that you guys can see how to put your quilt together, okay? What you have in your packet this month is just the instructions about how to put it together, and you are going to get to come in and pick your own border fabric, which I will be explaining in just a minute, okay? But here is a picture, a black and white picture of what the quilt is going to look like, and here's how this works. So your 24-inch blocks, your big blocks, are going to be here and here. The 6-inch blocks are all in these corners, okay? And you're going to be making one additional 6-inch block. I'm putting it here because what I was trying to get to was all paths point to birdie, and this month your block is a fussy cut square with a bird in the middle. So, I mean, that's what I'm doing. You can do it however you want. That's what's fun about this, is you can put your 6-inch blocks in any of these positions and your 24-inch blocks in any of those positions. You can also decide where you want your flying geese. And you can put all the colors together, you can separate them, you can mix them up, however you want to do it. But what we've done is given you this black and white layout, and you can make copies if you want, but you can kind of color it in and see how your quilt is going to look before you sew it together. We're also going to have some sew it together days. So if you would like to come and use our design walls in the classroom, we have days that you can sign up for, and you can come and lay your quilt out and start to sew it together and ask questions. Details of all of that are in the instructions for this month. Okay? Okay, so here's how this is going to work. What we're going to do is you're going to sew your quilt together, and here's another sort of in progress picture, okay? So how it works is you actually have two finishing options. The first finishing option is like this, where you've got your extra flying geese on the edges, and this is going to be the outer border fabric, and you get to come and pick that. The other option is leave those flying geese off, and you'll just make a solid border all the way around, which I don't have a box drawn on this picture, which I'm obviously going to have to fix. But that's the other option. You can just sew a solid border all the way around, and we'll be explaining how to do all of that in a subsequent video, okay? So that's the first decision that you have to make. When you go to sew it together, what you're going to do is you're going to sew your flying geese together in groups of 8. So you're going to sew, these are groups of 8, this is a group of 8, so is this. There's 8 flying geese in all of these sections. So sew all your geese together in groups of 8. And then you're going to sew your geese to a giant block, sew another set of geese on, and then what I did was I sewed this block to this set and sewed that all together, which we are going to talk about in the next video, okay? In this video, what I'm going to talk to you about is just your flying geese. So here I have a set of 4 green flying geese sewn together, okay? And these guys went together really, really nicely. I didn't have any trouble at all. You can see that my points, none of my points are cut off. Some of my points have a little bit of blue at the tops. That one comes directly to the bottom of this flying geese. Either way is acceptable. Either way is fine, okay? What I did have happen though was this one, when I sewed this guy on, when I sewed him on to this one, what happened was when it sewed on, it looked like this at the bottom. Okay, so I had my 1/4-inch seam allowance over here, and over here, my point went right to the corner, all right? Which I thought was fine until I went to sew it on to the next block, and then look what happened. When I sewed my 1/4-inch seam allowance on, see, my point got cut off, and it was a pretty glaring mistake. Again, this is what it's supposed to look like. After you sew your geese together, you should have a 1/4 inch of your background fabric on those points, okay? So this one was pretty bad. If you can see this, it's actually kind of wonky now because I ripped and I sewed it together, and I ripped and I sewed it together, and I tried to fix it and it didn't work. So what I finally decided was I needed to make a new flying geese. Now you guys are going to have a few extra flying geese, so many of you probably won't have this problem. But on the off chance that you guys do, I want to show you how to make one flying geese with the wing clipper, okay? So I'm going to show you how I'm going to fix this problem. I'm going to fix this problem by making a flying geese the traditional way, that is the non-tucker way, but I'm going to make it so that I can use my wing clipper to trim it down, so that I'll still have, I'll have all my points in the right spots. So what you're going to start with is, this is a green rectangle that is 7 3/4 by 4 1/4. Okay, so, and then I've got 2 squares that are 4 1/4. So I started with those guys, and now I'm going to flip them over, and I'm going to draw lines on the back of my squares from corner to corner. And I hope you guys can see it when I'm done here. Let's see. Okay, and I already did the other one. So just corner to corner, all right? And now I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and what we're going to do is we're going to sew it on from the bottom corner to the top corner, and we're going to press it, and then we'll sew the other one on, okay? And then we'll trim it down. So once we do that, then I'll show you how to sew the group of 4 together, but let's get through this step first. Okay, so I'm at the sewing machine. I've got my machine set up with 1.8 stitch length, and I've got my square laid on here so that my raw edges are exactly together on all 3 of these sides, okay? And now I'm going to sew on my line. I'm just going to sew directly on the line with all those raw edges together, 1.8 stitch length. Okay, so I've cut my threads, and now what I'm going to do is pull this back, and what I want to make sure is that my top edges are even, and this comes directly into the corner, and it does. So I'm going to go trim a 1/4 inch away and then press this open, okay? Okay, so I'm putting my 1/4 inch line on my ruler on my seam line, okay? And I'm trimming a 1/4 inch away. And then what I'm going to do is, I'm going to meet you back at the sewing machine, but I'm going to press my seams open, and then I'm going to press them towards my dark triangle. So I'm pressing towards the dark side, so my seam will end up like that, okay? Okay, so my seam is pressed towards my dark triangle, and now what I'm going to do is right sides together. My diagonal line goes this way, and I'm laying it on the other half of my flying geese. All 3, this side, and this side, I want all those raw edges together. If you have to, if your squares aren't exactly the same, you want this side and this side, the top and the short side perfection, and your bottom side would be less important. But if they're not the same size, then you probably want to recut them anyway. Okay, so I've got everything lined up. Sewing right on the line. And again, we're checking to make sure our top edge is exactly equal and the point comes directly into the corner down here. If either of those things aren't true, you want to rip your square off now and re-sew it. Once you cut your seam allowance, it's too late. Okay, so now we're going to go back and trim that, press our square open, and then I'll show you how to trim it. Okay, so 1/4 inch line on our ruler on our seam line. Trim those squares away, or those triangles. And now I'm going to press it open or no, not press it open. I'm going to press it open and then press it to the dark side, and then I'm going to show you how to trim. Okay, I feel like you guys have watched me press enough over the last 9 months, so I just did that off camera. Seams are pressed towards the dark side. Excuse me, I'm going to choke to death, and then we're going to trim this up. Okay, trim it the same way we've trimmed every single flying geese for the last 9 months. We're trimming it to be 3.5 by 6.5. So 3.5 inch line down here, starts in this, make sure it's hitting exactly the point where the black or the dark and the light come together. Follow it across, make sure it's hitting exactly where the dark and the light come together. Follow it up. We've got some hanging over the top. We've got our V coming into this little V right here. We've got some hanging off over here. You will notice we are trimming off a lot, but at this point, if you just need one flying geese, let's just go for it, right? Because who cares if we're trimming off a lot if we're going to end up with one absolutely perfect. Okay, same thing. V, V, 3.5, 6.5. And again, the dimensions to start with were your navy squares should be 4.25 inches, and your rectangle for your big part here should be 7.75 by 4.25. This is why you put Invisigrip on your ruler, guys, because this sucker wants to slip. Okay, so now I have a perfect flying geese. As you can see, it is much better than this guy because I've got plenty of room up here, and I've got my points come directly into the corners down here, which again was the problem with this one. This point was way too high. So now I'm going to sew my flying geese together. And this shouldn't be hard, okay? This should be one of the easiest parts. So I'm going to sew them together in this order. I'll meet you at the sewing machine. Okay, so I'm going to sew these two together, and I want my points to go this way, all right? I want this one behind this guy. And that, if that matters to you when you're laying this out, make sure you get them in the right order, okay? So I want this one on top of this one. But here's my big tip. I found it much easier to sew them all together when I had this on top. The other way, you just have this nice big open space with no seams or anything. When you sew with this on top, you can see where your seam lines cross, okay? I can see exactly where my point is on my flying geese. So if I sew here, I'm cutting my point off. If I sew way back here, I'm leaving a lot of navy blue at the top. If I can sew it right across where my seam lines come together, I'm going to get a perfect point. So I'm making sure all my raw edges are together. And I'm sewing with my seam, with my point on top. And I'm just sewing at 1/4 inch. And again, scant quarter, best you can do. Raw edges together and just barely skimming the edge of that foot. Okay, when I get to my seam, I'm watching that point right there, and I'm making sure I either sew directly through it or just barely to the right of it, okay? Okay, when I'm done, before I even open it, I'm checking here. If these stitches get wobbly, see, that's perfect. But if this seam, it's easier to see on this side, if this seam starts to go like this, or it starts to go like this, you might need to adjust your presser foot pressure. If your presser foot is pressing too hard, when it gets to this big thick seam right here, it pushes your fabric out of the way. And that is not your sewing machine helping you, it's your sewing machine making your work a pain in the butt. Okay, so now I'm going to sew these other two together. And again, I'm going to sew with that seam on top so I can see it. sure your raw edges are all together. And just barely skimming the edge of your foot. Okay, and now I have a set of 2 and a set of 2. It's easier to sew things together when they're the same size, all right? So I sewed these 2 and these 2, and now I'm gonna sew those guys together. And then I'm gonna show you about pressing. There we go, no points cut off. Okay, so pressing is right here. So here is what I'm going to tell you. This will be easier later on. I'm pressing everything open first. And then I'm going to do something that might surprise you. Normally, we would tell you to press this up because there's a big lump here already, but I'm actually going to tell you to press this down. So press it so that what you want to be able to see are these seams here, these seams on the edges, all right? It's going to make it easier when you sew these flying geese onto the edges of your big blocks if those seams are pressed down. It took me a while to figure this out. And it wasn't fun, by the way, either, figuring it out. But it will make your lives easier. So that when you're done, from the back, all of the tops of your geese are cut off, okay? And then, like I said, press these down on top of themselves. Which is weird, but that's okay. Okay, so again, what we're going to do is you're going to sew all of your geese together in sets of 8, and then we'll move on. Okay, so when you're done, this is how it looks, okay? You want to be able to see these seams right here. You want to see these seam lines because it'll be easier when you attach your flying geese to your squares. So what you're going to do is sew them together. Set of 8 here, set of 8 here. And I want you to notice, see, these 4 are facing this way and these 4 are facing this way, okay? And it's like that here, 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 all the way around the perimeter. And these inside ones, they're pointing towards this block. Okay, so sew your geese together in sets of 8. 4 of those sets of 8 should all be going in one direction, and these guys should all be pointing at each other so that when they meet up in the center, they look like that. Okay, so get those all sewn together, and then you can go on to video 2. The video 2, excuse me, for this month is going to be attaching the sets of 8 to your squares. If you have a problem, you might have it there because the sets of 8 geese have to be exactly the size of your big squares, but we are going to address exactly how to deal with those problems in the next video. Okay? Have fun.